From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for the Red Zone, the spring game edition. This is our extended look at OU football, and yes, the spring game is happening this week. Maybe not when we thought it was going to be, guys, but we'll talk about that in a second. I'm Jenny Carlson here with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, we thought we'd have a Saturday spring game, as we always do, but with weather and cold coming in, OU makes the decision to move this game to Friday night. Ryan, a 7:30 game time start. They're going to move the concert before to 6:30. We've just found out that the game will be broadcast on Fox Sports Oklahoma Plus and Fox College Sports TV. So we'll continue to get more information about that as the day goes on. But moving this game, this is no small thing, even though it's a spring game.
Yeah, I mean, you take in the fact that they expected north of 45,000 people there on Saturday. There's a lot of people, even though it's a spring game, that make arrangements to be in Norman for this. It's a massive recruiting weekend for Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley, as they've made the spring game a focus over the last 2 years as the recruiting calendar changed due to NCAA guidelines. So this was not taken in lightly. But as the weather reports continued to come in and become a little bit clearer early in the week, they decided that they couldn't take a chance of waiting until Saturday. So they moved it to Friday night. And Lincoln Riley said they're able to get in all the official visits that they wanted. Certainly the crowd probably won't be as strong as it would have been otherwise, but it was something that they needed to do.
But at the same time, Barry, talking about that crowd size, I mean, as Ryan said, this has become a huge recruiting venture, which, I mean, it's not as much about what's on the field as who's watching what's happening. If they leave that game on Friday, there may be less people there if they leave the game on Saturday, there may be less people there on Friday night, but if it's raining and 45 degrees on Saturday, that crowd might be almost non-existent.
Yeah, this was a 100% recruiting decision. Lincoln Riley, we saw it last year with all the hoopla around the spring game, even more so this year. Oklahoma is turning the spring game into an annual recruiting bonanza, trying to follow after some of the SEC schools that do the same. And it's probably their biggest recruiting weekend of the year in terms of what they want to get out of it. Been a disaster to have a spring game with all your top recruits there and 6,000 people in the stands. They want to do their best to get, what was it? Did they say 50,000 last year? Is that what they seemed like? 52,000.
Right
52,000 was in my mind. Lincoln Riley wants to go above and beyond that. They're not going to get above and beyond that on a Friday night, but they will get at least in the ballpark, I think, as opposed to what they would be on a 40-degree day on Saturday. I don't know why they don't just move the dang thing back 2 weeks from now on. If you're going to be that dependent on the crowd and the weather, don't flirt with it. Go later in the spring. I know there's other things going on, but if it's this important, get it as close to the summer as possible.
Well, Lincoln Riley was asked a little bit about that and the timing of everything, Ryan, because, obviously a week from now we're looking at Easter weekend, but he really likes this weekend. He thinks this is the prime time, even though they had to move the game back a day.
Yeah, he said just because of the recruiting calendar, what kids have going on later in April, you start getting into graduation type stuff, proms, things like that. So in order to maximize the recruiting weekend, you want to do it here. Now you take the chances of bad weather.
Exactly.
We saw it last year when it was a rainy day at the spring game. Obviously, we've seen it this year, but I don't think that that's going to change.
Yeah, a little bit chilly last year. They did the Bob Stoops statue dedication. I think everybody was bundled up and freezing for that, but people made it and a big crowd. But it is interesting that they would move this, Barry, because and to hear Lincoln Riley talk, while I'm sure it was a massive pain in the keister to do all this changing, he sounds fired up. Hey, guys, get off the plane. The first thing they do is come to the stadium. It's full. It's ready for. I mean, this guy. He never had. There's never a bad thing going on when it comes to recruiting. It's all going to work out. It sounds like in Lincoln Riley's world.
He's definitely changed the culture, I think, in Norman in terms of the recruiting. Being really progressive, contemporary, modern. Not to say that what Bob Stoops was doing was wrong, but it was definitely more traditional, more old school. Lincoln Riley on the sellout to social media, all the various video campaigns, the recruiting weekends with the spring game. It's all about It's all about signing the best players possible. And so far, it's gone great. We'll see if the Sooners can sustain it. But the truth of the matter is, the game itself, the spring game itself, is not as paramount to this football program as those guys that are going to be here this weekend. So, as much as we like looking forward to a spring game, the fans love it, seeing what the quarterbacks do, all that. The coaches would just soon be behind closed doors to do all that. They want this kind of stage, though, for the recruits, and the fans help make it an event.
Well, on that note, let's talk about what's going to happen on the field, which might be irrelevant to Lincoln Riley and might ultimately be irrelevant to what we see out of this football team in the fall. But Ryan, this will be a chance for Oklahoma fans to see Jalen Hurts for the first time in a Sooner uniform, probably the blue practice jersey, because nobody wants any quarterbacks to get hit. But what are you expecting? What are you hoping to see out of the quarterbacks, namely Jalen Hurts on Friday night?
Well, I think you just see how Jalen Hurts makes the throws in this offense, and we really haven't seen much of Jalen Hurts for a couple years, and then he wasn't a dynamic thrower. You've got to be in the framework of Lincoln Riley's offense. Lincoln Riley talked about how even in the second half of the SEC championship game last year, when Jalen Hurts led Alabama to a come-from-behind win over Georgia, that Hurts showed much better ability to throw than he had the year before. But I think that's the main thing that everybody wants to see, is how Jalen Hurts can make those throws, especially with the group of wide receivers that he has at his disposal.
And Barry, I think you said a week or so ago when we were talking about quarterbacks and spring games, and you were talking about the fact that you can't really tell very much when it comes to spring games because you split the squad or however it's lined up. But how quarterbacks throw and how receivers catch, those are some things you can actually tell. So what are you going to be looking for out of the quarterbacks on Friday night?
Well, I'm going to be looking for the things my mind can comprehend, which in football is not all that much. But accuracy, I can figure out accuracy. Hands, can guys make catches? Hopefully, even in traffic. I hope there's some DBs that get close enough to create some traffic. That's what the pitch and catch game is what I can understand. All the other stuff is completely contextual, very difficult, to know if if there's a hole in the line on a running play. Is that good or is that bad? I don't know. I don't know what it is. When this O line, when this O line's blocking this D line, that may be a bad thing. You think, oh no, what's Texas going to do? But the pitch and catch part of football, that is something that we can discern pretty easily, and so that's what I'm going to be watching out. If they trot out some kickers, I always like to see if a guy can kick the ball through the goalpost. So that's about it. They're not going to let them tackle, I don't think, to any kind of really physical degree. So that's hard to gauge. But the pitching and catching, backyard football, that we can figure out.
And Ryan, I think to Barry's point about not tackling quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, even if he is an improved thrower, even if he is more seasoned and better than we last saw him throwing the ball, running the football, that's going to be part of his game, more so probably than we've seen out of a lot of quarterbacks that Oklahoma's had.
Yeah, obviously Kyler Murray just brought a dynamic level of speed to that position. Jalen Hurts doesn't have that kind of speed.
Yeah.
But what Jalen Hurts does have is the build of basically a linebacker. He's going to be really hard to bring down. That's going to be hard to get a feel for in this game with the amount of contact that you're going to see, especially when it comes to those quarterbacks. But that's going to be a big part of his game, is his ability to stick his nose in there. He's going to be a combination of the throwing quarterbacks we've seen the last couple of years and, say, Blake Bell and the Belldozer. Wow. So that's going to be really interesting to watch this season. But on Saturday, I don't know how much feel we're going to get for that. Yeah,
and, talking about things being split, they had a draft and split guys up. Offensive line is obviously an area where, Sooners are rebuilding anyway, so then to split the rebuild for these teams, it's going to be really hard to tell. Again, running backs, same sort of deal. What are they seeing? What are they getting? But, Barry, this wide receiver core, you were talking about catching the ball. CeeDee Lamb, seems like he's going to be the guy, but then they've got these five-star guys. I'm interested to see what those guys look like. Could they, I assume the thought is at least a couple of them are going to play in the fall, but where are they? How do they look out there on a college field for the first time?
Well, those guys, what I call the Theo Weiss crowd, but also some of the veterans too.
Yeah.
Guys like Michael Jones. We wrote about him a few days ago. This is a guy that came here as a ballyhooed recruit, and frankly, I'd forgotten he was on the team until our note in the paper this week. But he said his decision to redshirt was his, and he just thought it was best, and it looks like maybe that was a good decision. Can he develop and become a good player? Charleston Rambo, the guy with the greatest name, where he didn't do much as a freshman, and then all of a sudden he makes the great catch against Alabama in the Orange Bowl. So, they got some intriguing guys. I want to see what those guys look like, catching these balls from Mordecai and from Jalen Hurts.
All right, guys, we've talked about the game move. We've talked about the quarterbacks and the offense. But probably the most important thing with Oklahoma football is the defense and where this rebuild under Alex Grinch is. But again, how much can we tell in a spring game? Ryan, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to see. I don't know what it's going to look like. I talked to a few guys on Tuesday night, I guess it was, and I sort of asked that question, can you see it? Will people be able to see it? They said yes. But what do you think? What will we see? What will be the differences out there?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to tell, is how much we're going to be able to see, just the different level of, I don't know if it's enthusiasm or just the difference between this defense and what we saw a year ago when they struggled so much. I think the important thing is, and as Barry sort of mentioned, it's a good thing or bad thing. Whatever happens, you wonder which side of it is. But you want to see some turnovers. You want to see the emphasis on those turnovers really shine through. I don't think anybody has much of a concern about what this offense is going to look like in the fall. It's a question about the defense. And if the defense can turn this offense over especially, then I think maybe you start feeling a little bit better about it. I thought one of the interesting things that Alex Grinch said when we talked to him on Wednesday night was that he spent a lot of time with the corners playing press coverage in spring, and that's something we haven't really seen from Oklahoma's defense lately. And he said they're not going to use it a ton in the fall, but it's about putting people in uncomfortable situations and forcing them to make plays as much as they can. And I think that's going to be something interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, I think it was Deshaun White who said he thought if they could get 3 turnovers in this spring game, that would be. Now, he said they want to hold the offense out of the end zone, which, of course, every defense does. But 3 turnovers, we've heard Alex Grinch talk about the turnover metrics and how important that is. And Oklahoma didn't turn anybody over almost at all last year, Barry. That would be a pretty significant, even in a spring game, it would be significant to see that level of turnovers.
It would be great, and I agree with the philosophy, because the truth of the matter is the rules, the development of quarterbacks, just the culture of football today makes it impossible on the defense. And frankly, we see that on all kinds of sports. But even in the NFL, defense is at a disadvantage. You're not going to stop people on a consistent basis if you're playing teams of quality. You're better off just taking the ball from them. And if they go 80 yards on you, that's better than a death by 1,000 paper cuts. So the hard part is doing that, taking the ball from somebody. People throw it around so much, they're using quarterbacks. Listen, this is going to be news to a lot of us, but Oklahoma's not the only place with accurate quarterbacks. Other teams deliver the ball on target too. It's very difficult to get interceptions. It's difficult to rush the passer and force mistakes. People, maybe if they run a lot, you can jar some fumbles, but not a lot of running game anymore, so even causing fumbles, it's difficult. But I think that is the plan you have to use. So I applaud Alex Grinch. It's not going to come easy. It's not going to come quick. You need bigger, stronger, faster players to induce turnovers, but you got to start somewhere. Spring game would be a great place.
As I think about difference makers on defense, Ryan, and we've talked about this in a variety of ways over the last year or two, linebackers are a spot where they really can maybe affect that change as much as anything, because they've just not been those dynamic playmakers that we've expected Oklahoma linebackers to be over the years. Then the Caleb Kelly injury happens. And again, I know they're splitting the squad, but those linebackers, What are you going to be looking for on Friday night out of the linebackers specifically?
Well, I think there's two guys, two specific players that I'm really going to be watching hard, and that's, you mentioned one of them, Deshaun White. Mm-hmm. Deshaun White is filling in that Caleb Kelly spot. Heck, he might have beaten out Caleb Kelly. He has been a guy who has been generating a lot of buzz over the spring because of his development. Heck, Tim Kish was talking glowingly about him a year ago and said there's no way this kid's going to redshirt. He's going to find a way to play. Well, he did play pretty significantly as a backup. So I'm looking at his development, especially in that weak side spot. And then also Ryan Jones, a guy that we didn't see a ton of last year. He started 3 games at the strong side spot, but as the year went on, that spot sort of disappeared during Big 12 play. So they moved him inside. He's got a unique athletic ability, being a former defensive back. He had played on the outside the last couple of years. Now he's moved to the inside. I think he's a guy who, because of what Alex Grinch wants to do, he can be a force on the inside as well. We'll see if he's able to find the field. But I think Saturday I'm going to be looking for him and seeing what he's able to do on the inside now that he's there.
By the way, if I can get Deshaun White's last name stuck in my head and not think Deshaun Watson every time I think of him, I'll feel much better about myself. I've got some time, but boy, that's a tough one for me. Barry, Ryan's talking about watching those 2 linebackers. Is there anybody specifically on defense that you'll be watching, even with this split squad setup, that you really want to see how they perform individually on Friday night?
Oh, I'm just, I'm going to look at the DBs. Those guys just are always under the gun, always sort of on an island. The entire crowd, the 2 Treys, Brown and Norwood, Parnell Motley.
I think Delarian Turner-Yell.
Turner-Yell seems to be coming on, and the safeties, have been sort of an issue. So just how are those guys covering? Are they near the ball? Can they make a play when they are near it? I think those guys have played better than we've given them credit for. It's just hard to play that position. But, and the other thing is that's something we can actually sort of see in a spring game, because it's not so much physicality, which is limited in a spring scrimmage. You can sort of see what, how the ball skills, the cover skills, those things are pretty close to a game. So that's, that would be what my focus would be on.
Ryan, one last thing before we get out of here. Something else people will get to see on Friday night is a defensive coordinator on the field. Alex Grinch is going to be on the field. That's the plan, at least, heading into the fall, and he'll be there. Mike Stoops had been on the field, then he moved to the box for the last little bit. He was at OU as the defensive coordinator. What's the benefit of all that?
Well, I think talking to Alex Grinch about that on Wednesday, he said it's about being able to, one, feel like you're in a football game. He said you get a really good sense of things from the press box, but it almost feels like a video game up there. For him, it feels more like he's involved in the game down there. But it's also about being able to look players in the eye and have direct conversations when things don't go right. And he said there's going to be times this year and times, in every game really, when things break down. And he said it's much better to have those conversations face to face rather than on a headset where things can maybe the translation gets lost a little bit. Mm-hmm. So Alex Grinch moved to the sidelines his second year at Washington State, said that he felt like that gave him the best opportunity to be successful, and that's what he's going to do moving forward. He said it's very similar to Lincoln Riley's feel on offense. Lincoln Riley, even when he was an offensive coordinator, liked to be down on the field. He's obviously stayed that as the head coach, and it's also about trusting who you've got in the press box.
All right, guys. Again, a 7:30 start on Friday night for the OU spring game. We'll have the TV listings in the paper tomorrow, a couple of Fox properties where you can see that game if you're not headed down. We'll have lots more information in Friday's newspaper and on News OK, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.